good day, or bonjour perhaps. So as I've mentioned in previous videos, I'm a little bit obsessed with learning languages, and there's no language I've put more time into than French. And as part of the whole immersing yourself in the culture and the language in your day-to-day life, what better thing for me to go for than music? If you look on language learning threads, Quora, French learning subreddits, whatever like that, you'll find dozens of these questions. Can anyone recommend some good bands to me in French? And particularly at the heavier end, you'll get tens if not hundreds of responses for obscure bands. Today I'm going to list 8 French bands that I think you need to hear. There's not going to be any obscure bands in here, no up and coming acts, no one has heard of. These tend to be, at the more famous end. Also, they are going to all be bands who sing primarily in French, so don't expect any Gojira, and if I was including pop, don't expect anything like Daft Punk. With that said, let's get into it. Let's kick things off with a very early band. At first glance, Telephone is unadulterated dad rock. Not quite as heavy as AC/DC, but a damn sight more interesting than, say, Whitesnake. They're extremely popular and they are actually fairly known. They actually opened for the Rolling Stones back in the 70s in their North American tour. Despite not having released a studio album in my lifetime, Telephone are a band I continue to see recommended. I'll admit here to liking their more familiar hits like the very catchy rock and roll New York avec toi, or the heavily romanticised Un Autre Monde. Like a lot of bands that broke up during their peak, they have reformed for some high profile gigs in recent years under the moniker Les Anxieux. To talk about French rock band and not mention Noir Désir would be sacrilege. Possibly the most influential band on this list. Their back catalogue ranges from the extremely aggressive songs like L'Homme Pressé to the more gentle songs like La Vente Nu Portera. And with songs like Charlie, Noir Désir proved that you could take that classic French accent and way of speaking and apply it to heavier music and get something with a very distinct character. It seems that Noir Désir hit their commercial peak around the millennium until a tragic event in which lead singer Bertrand Cantat drunkenly beat his girlfriend to death in a fight. Naturally, this damaged the rest of the band's prospects, even when they tried to reform after Cantat left prison. Nonetheless, Noir Désir have left quite a legacy on the face of French rock music and French music generally, and Bertrand Cantat has had a fairly successful solo career, if not one that's marked with a lot of controversy. Right, we're 3 bands in, and we're already at my favourite French band ever. At first listen, Indochine might come across as something between Placebo and Depeche Mode, but when you look at their great stadium sound aesthetic put against crushingly sad lyrics, there's something about them that reminds me a little more of Manic Street Preachers in recent years. Now, despite starting at the beginning of the 80s, Indochine have been incredibly prolific and relevant this whole time, and actually I would say the last 4 years has seen a complete revival for the band. Their last album, 2017's Treize, saw great commercial success, with 2 lead singles, Un été foncé and the extremely raw La Vie est Belle, which has one of my favourite opening lines of any song ever. Je suis né ici pour être qu'avec toi. They recently released a single attached to a short animated film to mark their upcoming double album, which will mark their 40th anniversary. Their contemporary stuff is phenomenal, but if like me you like that 80s aesthetic, then I can recommend to you L'Aventurier and Tailleur Noir for that classic 80s sound. It really belongs on any 80s playlist. I often see this guy described as pop, and to be honest, I can see it. Like Paul McCartney and Sting, Calogero found some success as a bassist and vocalist in a previous band before going on to have an illustrious career over the past couple of decades. His sound throughout the 90s and the early 2000s was really fitting of the whole pop rock scene at that time, with very catchy hits like On a Passante. While Voler de Nuit has one of the most beautiful lyrical performances, it's just got a very catchy line, and I often find myself singing it around the house without meaning to. The trademark for Calogero is anything that he sings will get stuck in your head. And just like Andershin, Calogero also has an album coming out in November. It will be his 8th studio album, and it will be called Centre-Ville. Frankly, I'm hoping to get stuck into his other 7 albums well before then. Now, if you wanted to find a band that sounded quintessentially French, but also were rock, I would recommend nothing more to you than Louise Attaque. Taking cues from Noir Désir's aesthetic of, putting the Frenchy sound to rock, they are not afraid to push expectations and experiment. Many of their songs put forward a rock sensibility with a stripped back sound, and leads being provided by violinist Arnaud Samuel. Louise Attaque are most known for their first 2 albums, which came out at the tail end of the 20th century, but their third effort, 2005's A plus tard Crocodile, features a much more fun sound, with absolute bop Si l'on marchait jusqu'à demain as its lead single. This band's entire catalogue is a really enchanting blend of gentle and driving rock. But I would say La Plume and Ton Invitation are good places to start. This is one of those bands that I've only discovered recently, and I'm now wondering why I only discovered them recently. Rather prolific, releasing 4 albums between 2001 and 2007 and 3 in the last decade, Luke should be picked up by any serious rock fans outside of France. To me, they are an irresistible melange of garage rock, punk and post-punk. When listening to Luke, I might get the vibe of, say, The Strokes or perhaps The Killers, but with a lot more bite. La Sentinelle was my introduction to the band, and from that one song alone I was hooked. In terms of other songs, I would say Soledad scratches the same itch but maybe a bit more aggressively, while Paradis Rouge... We'll put it this way, if Alkaline Trio were looking to cover a song in French, it would have to be Paradis Rouge. Sonically and lyrically, it's basically Alkaline Trio. Finally, I strongly recommend their foray into political rap rock with a single from 2015 called Quelque part en France. The last 2 bands I'm going to mention today are at the heavier end of things than the previous 6. And the first of these bands is Acme. Someone on Reddit a while back tried to tell me that Acme are punk. I don't know what kind of punk you're listening to. This band is heavy. Another fairly prolific band, before they split in 2019, Acme released 9 albums, including 1 double album, between 2002 and 2019, as well as 4 EPs on top of that. I discovered this band by hearing Lux Assassin on La Grosse Radio, a prime example of the metalcore that they were putting out between 2008 and 2017. Go back to before 2008 and you'll discover sort of dark, grungy, nu metal sounds. That's very familiar to some of the stuff that Incubus was putting out in its Morning View album. For example, Si n'existe pas is one of those songs that's really worth listening to in the pitch black. Put it on any playlist alongside Alice in Chains or Pearl Jam and you'll be set. On their most recent and supposedly final album, Requiem, Acme have gone back to this nu metal, grungy sound, but have adopted a bit more of a heavier approach into it, and occasionally what could be mistaken for a Latin rock influence. Personally, I recommend Entre les Mains from this album, but lead single Enfer is equally solid. Unfortunately, metal doesn't tend to have a lot of entries coming from France. And even more unfortunate is the lack of female vocalists and frontwomen in metal. There are reasons for both, not good reasons, but reasons nonetheless. Traditionally, French music stems from the chanson genre, which places a focus on deep and clever lyrics over, say, instrumental prowess. But as we've seen with Louise Attaque, this need not be the case without losing, its Gallic influence. As for the lack of female singers, I can only put that down to, metal vocalists are quite aggressive, and unless they're going to fall into the symphonic metal trap, there's a certain stereotype about what a female vocalist is meant to sound like. Sco Delange smashed both of these stereotypes. Celine Delange's command over her range of voice is incredible, switching with ease between unsettlingly childlike, powerful chorister vocals, and some of the straight up best death growls I've ever heard. In this band, there's only her, a drummer, and 2 8-string guitarists, but it sounds like there's a lot more going on. In typical prog metal fashion, expect surprising influences, shifting time signatures, and long songs with lots of sections. Karma is the song that I first heard from this band, and it fits the bill for all of those reasons I've just listed. Once I heard that, I traced it back to their second album, 2017's Ascendance, which is a goldmine of creative energy. Agentologie and closing track Les Oeils Noyés, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, draw effective influence from traditional Indian and African music. And their debut album, Phénomène, is nearly as good, with the title track sounding like a very dark, twisted nursery rhyme. So yes, those are 8 French bands that I think you need to hear right now, whether or not you speak the language or are looking to learn the language. Please let me know in the comments once you've gone ahead and listened to them, or let me know in the comments if you already heard these and maybe were expecting me to listen today. Also let me know in the comments if there are any other French bands that you strongly recommend to me. If I haven't heard of them, I'll be very excited to. Otherwise, I only have one thing left to say. À plus tard!